So this here is a replica of something that is now at the British Museum. It was found in Iraq, and it portrays, it was found in the palace of the Assyrian kings, and it portrays the Battle of Lachish. And the Battle of Lachish is a really important scene in history. Number one, because it's mentioned in the Tanakh, but also it's described by Assyrian art. It's described in Assyrian written texts. It's mentioned in the Tanakh, and we have Hebrew written texts that were found on site in the area of Lachish, called the Lachish letters, that actually describe some of the events in this battle as well. And then we have another source, which is the archaeological excavations of the site itself. And so, for example, here you see a siege ramp. And the Assyrians were masters of siege warfare. You see the siege ramp, and they're shooting arrows, and they've got a battering ram. And when they excavated, they found giant arrows, and they found the siege ramp. They actually found an archaeological excavation, the siege ramp, that's described in all these different sources. And so it's really a beautiful dovetailing of all these different types of information, art and written documents from both sides, from the Israelite side and the Assyrian side, as well as in the Tanakh and archaeology. So what they did in Assyrian art is they're showing several scenes at once, all on a single, what's called relief. And again, this is a replica of the original ones today at the British Museum. So here you see them sieging the city, but then after the siege is over, they're taking more booty, and they're taking captives, they're taking slaves of the Judean people who were captured. And then you can see there were people who they weren't really happy with, and they're executing. And you see people bowing down before either the king of Assyria or one of his generals. And then here, famously, you have three people being crucified. And the way they're crucified is what we actually call impalement. But in Hebrew, it's the same word. You can see what they did. And the Assyrians were masters of this. They were infamous for doing Assyrian things. The most important thing, one of the most important things in the museum, one of my favorite things, perhaps my favorite things, I wrote a book about it, are the two silver scrolls that were found at Katef Hinnom, what today is known as Bible Hill. And they have written on them the priestly blessing from Numbers, chapter 6, verses 24 to 26. And why were they written on these tiny little silver scrolls? And one of them is significantly smaller than the other. And the reason they were written on these silver scrolls was probably as an amulet. It was probably some superstition that they believed that the priestly blessing would protect the person in the afterlife. There's certainly no reason to put a biblical text in a grave. That doesn't even make sense from a Torah perspective, but this is what they did. And it's today the oldest preserved copy of any biblical text we have. About 20 years ago, they actually did really high resolution photographs, or what at the time was high resolution photographs, using different types of lighting. And they, in the photographs, you can see, and there's actually another biblical verse from Deuteronomy where God is referred to as Shomer Habrit v'Hachesed, he who guards or keeps the covenant and the chesed, the grace, the loving kindness. So there's actually two biblical verses, or two different biblical passages, Numbers 6 and another one from Deuteronomy. Here is a recreation. This is not the actual tomb, but this is a recreation of what the tomb looked like where they found the silver scrolls. And just among all this rubble, right, they had bodies laid out, and then they had all kinds of pieces of pottery and lamps. And then among that, they had these two tiny scrolls that one of them was found by the archaeologists directly, and the other they only found because they sifted through everything. They did, which is more common today, but back then it was pretty rare in the 80s. They sifted through everything and they found this tiny little scroll. Look how small it is. It's under a magnifying glass. Now come around to the side and see how small it is. I'll show my hand for comparison. It's tiny. Here we have a really important inscription. And this was found in a place in Israel called Beit Loya. And you can see here in Paleo Hebrew, it says, Yud Rei Shin Lamed Mem Yerushalayim, Jerusalem. It's the oldest reference to Jerusalem outside the Tanakh. And, well, I should say in Hebrew, there's earlier references to Jerusalem in non-Hebrew sources, in Assyrian sources and Akkadian sources. according to some archaeologists or paleographers, here's what it says. Yehovah Elohei kol haaretz, Yehovah, the God of all the earth. Harei Yehuda lo, the mountains of Judah belong to him. Elohei Yerushalayim, to the God of Jerusalem. Now, why do I say according to some archaeologists and paleographers? Because this is written on chalkstone. And chalkstone, I could rub it with my finger and create a new little line that would scratch it. And so it's hard to know what here is actually part of the writing and what is just a little scratch in the stone. And you can see that Yerushalayim, Yud Resh Shin Lamed Mem, are much whiter and deeper than all the words around it. I'm quite sure this is a replica, and that was done by the people who created the replica. In the original, I believe it says Yerushalayim, but a lot of the other words are not entirely clear what they say. Most important things in the museum, I know I've said that before, but here is a section on early Hebrew writing. Let's go in. And here you have different inscriptions in Paleo Hebrew. And this one here on the bottom is from Khirbat el-Kom. It's one of two inscriptions that mention Yehovah and his Asherah, which that's a no-no. Yehovah had a wife, according to these inscriptions, named Asherah. Asherah, as mentioned in the Tanakh, it says, tear down their altars, the altars to Baal, and cut down their Asherahs, which were the poles or trees that were next to the altar. And Asherah was actually one of the well, according to some sources, she was the mother of Baal. And so in the Hebrew sources, they make her the wife of Yehovah. And here the inscription says, let's see, it says, Uriyahu Hasal Ketava, Uriah, the officer, the minister, wrote it, Baruch Uriyahu leYehovah uLasher. May Uriyahu be blessed by Yehovah and by his Asherah. And then it says, Umitzareha Hoshia lo, and may he be saved from his trouble. So here he's asking Yehovah and his consort for salvation and blessing. So the other one we have that was found that mentions Yehovah and his Asherah was found in Sinai, and it was on display here at the Israel Museum until the late 90s, and then it was turned over to Egypt, and no one has seen it since. That's from Kuntalat Jud. So we have two of them. That's important because the one from Kuntalat Jud, it mentions Samaria or Shalom, and it's believed it was an Israelite, meaning from the northern kingdom of Israel. They're all Israelite. It was from Mamlechet Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel, and this one is from the kingdom of Judah. And until they found this one about 20 years ago, the story was, well, that was the people of the kingdom of Israel who assigned to Yehovah and Asherah. The Judeans didn't do that. Well, yes, they did. It was both of us who did. So we sinned. Let's see some of these other inscriptions. So one of these is a replica here. Until recently, this was the oldest Canaanite inscription in a form of, it's a debate, is it Canaanite or Paleo-Hebrew? So in the 13th century BCE from Lachish, the original, if I'm not mistaken, is on display at the British Museum. And it says, Matan, an offering to my lady Elat. So it is, Matan is a gift, an offering, Lerabati Elat. And Elat is the feminine of El. Right, so to my lord, my lordess, my mistress, Elah, the goddess, Elat. Okay, this may be my favorite thing at the museum. I know I've said it before, but really this time. So this was written around the time of King Josiah. So we're talking the late 7th century BCE, and it's called the Mesad Hashavyahu inscription. And it was written by a man who was very poor. And he's writing this as an appeal to a judge. He says, I had this debt and I was harvesting. And he says, I was harvesting and putting away my crop in the barn before Shabbat. And this man came and took away my garment. And he says to the judge, I didn't do anything wrong and I have nothing else to sleep with. Please have him return my garment. So first of all, it's the first reference to Shabbat outside the Tanakh. And number two, it describes what we see in Exodus and Deuteronomy, that if you take a pledge from somebody and they can't afford, they only have another garment. You can't repossess that pledge because they need it. You can't take away something that somebody needs if they're desperately poor. Even if you rightfully got it as a pledge, you can't go and repossess that, meaning take it away from them. And it says, what will the man sleep with in the Torah? And here he's literally saying, I've got nothing else. If this wasn't found in an archaeological excavation, I'm quite sure archaeologists would say it was a fake. But as it was found in a proper excavation, there's no dispute about its provenance. Discussion about the Paleo-Hebrew letters and really what's called Proto-Canaanite or Proto-Semitic. And here you can see the letter, what we call Nun. Each letter has a name that represents an object, and the first sound of that object is the sound of a letter. So Aleph is a bull, and so is the sound Aleph. Well, this is Bet, which is a house, Gimel, which is the hump of a camel. But then Dalet is the fourth letter that we know about. And Dalet means door, but that's not a door. What is that? It's a fish. And the letter wasn't called Dalet originally. It was called Dag, meaning fish. And then we have the letter Nun. Nun actually is the Aramaic word for fish. Nun is the Aramaic word for fish, and perhaps an ancient Hebrew word for fish as well. But the letter Nun wasn't a Nun, it was a Nachash, a snake. And so the original names of some of the letters and their shapes have changed over time.